My brothers and sisters, gather close. Look around you. Do you see the walls of your own church? The face of your own community? Hear the stories our ancestors whispered across the ocean, stories of freedom fought for and dignity never surrendered. For decades, we have watched the continent of Africa, the very cradle of civilization, struggle beneath shadows that ought to have long been banished. The shadow of the outside hand, the shadow of the debt that comes with chains. But I tell you today, a shift has come. A roar of dignity has echoed from the dry plains of the Sahel, a sound that shook the high towers of Washington, D.C. itself. The world did not expect it. They expected compliance. They expected silence. But in Ouagadougou, a young man, a leader named Captain Ibrahim Traoré, stepped forward and spoke a truth that had been locked away for generations. He stood for his people, and he told a superpower, "Your spies must leave. Your time of silent control is over. This is more than a news story, friend. This is a sermon about self-respect. It's a lesson in what it truly means for a nation to own its own soul. It is the beginning of a conversation we must have, and I invite you, if this message moves your spirit, if you believe in the power of a people standing tall, I invite you to subscribe to this channel now. Hit that button and join the congregation of those who seek the truth of Africa rising. Let us dive into this testimony. Hallelujah! If we are to understand the magnitude of this act, this declaration of independence by a young captain in Ouagadougou, we must first walk the long, dusty road that led him to that moment. It is a road paved with promises broken and contracts signed in the shadow of the night. Burkina Faso, like so many nations across our blessed motherland, inherited a grievous burden. It inherited a history where its rich, dark soil, filled with the treasures of gold, manganese, and uranium, was treated not as national endowment, but as a back garden for others to pluck from. For decades, the system was simple, yet suffocating. France maintained a prominent military footprint. Europe dictated the terms of trade, ensuring that resources were extracted with efficiency, while the return to the people was nothing but a pitiful trickle. The wealth went out, the poverty stayed in. And then, brothers and sisters, there was the United States, the presence that arrived not with marching bands, but with quiet, persistent agreements. They slipped into the shadows, offering the polished excuse of security cooperation. Under this banner, a hidden base, a compound of secrecy, was established right there on Burkina Faso soil. Oh, the irony. Billions of US dollars, billions, were spent each year on intelligence operations and high-tech security budgets across the Sahel. But if you drove just a few short miles from that supposedly secure compound, what would you find? Villages still struggled in the darkness for lack of electricity. Schools were crumbling. Clean water was a distant, desperate prayer. Can you hear the contradiction screaming? We are told that aid is being delivered, that budgets are flowing, that security is paramount. Yet, the Burkina Faso farmer still sells his precious harvest at prices so low he cannot feed his own family. The nation is rich, yet the people are poor. That, my friends, is the signature of a system where sovereignty is quietly traded for silence, piece by subtle piece. This is the system that Captain Traoré stepped into. He did not arrive merely as a president. He arrived as the heir to an unfinished struggle. He inherited the echoes of leaders like Patrice Lumumba, men who dared to say no and paid the ultimate price. He saw that for too long, Africa was being managed from the outside, its fate decided in distant capitals, its dignity compromised by conditions tied to every check. These operations, these secret bases, they were never truly about Africa's safety. They were about guarding America's own interests. They were about maintaining influence, ensuring access to minerals, and controlling the political trajectory of a continent. It was a silent form of control, a sophisticated neo-colonialism updated for the 21st century. The questions whispered in the markets and the classrooms grew impossible to ignore. Cooperation for whom? Aid for what purpose? Traoré saw that this dependency was not an accident. It was a carefully constructed cage, and his declaration against that hidden base, that demand for departure, was not an isolated political stunt. No, it was a powerful spiritual rejection of decades where the true meaning of independence was eroded, bit by devastating bit. And so, we must ask ourselves, as people who understand the price of freedom, if one leader dares to confront this inherited system of dependency, can it truly spark a continental shift where Africa finally, fundamentally, refuses to be managed from the outside? But the time for whispers was over, my friends. Because when the truth finally comes to light, it does not arrive as a gentle rain. It arrives as a righteous storm. What exactly did Captain Traoré and his investigators uncover inside that supposedly innocent compound? The answer, I promise you, will turn your righteous anger into a blaze. The Lord tells us that nothing is hidden that shall not be made manifest, nor anything secret that shall not be known and come to light. And that, my friends, is exactly what happened in Burkina Faso. The truth did not come from foreign reports or leaked cables in faraway lands. No, it rose up from the very soil, from the voices of the Burkinabe people themselves. Think about it, the villagers whispered. They spoke of land suddenly and mysteriously fenced off. Land that had belonged to their fathers and their fathers' fathers. They saw roads blocked without explanation, and they saw strangers, men in unfamiliar uniforms, watching movements in silence. These were not the rumors of wild imagination. They were the first tremors beneath the foundations of a massive lie. When Ibrahim Traoré, the man of principle, ordered a formal national investigation, the lie crumbled. What the investigators uncovered inside that so-called security compound was not merely staggering. It was a profound act of betrayal. It was an altar of betrayal built right there, on sovereign ground. Inside, they found the tools of silent war, satellite receivers, capable of drawing data from the entire region. They found surveillance drones, silent eyes circling the Sahel by night. And they found advanced listening devices, designed not to protect, but to eavesdrop. But here is where the betrayal cuts deepest, dear friends. Among the documents, they found maps. Detailed, high-resolution maps. These maps charted not only the nation's political boundaries, but the very earth beneath them, detailing Burkina Faso's immense mineral wealth. The precise locations of gold, manganese, and uranium. What was presented as cooperation had quietly become a mining operation. A mining of information that could dictate the economic future of Africa for the next century. What was worse, they found sensitive data tracking African leaders across the region. Files containing dossiers on ordinary Burkinabe citizens. Teachers, activists, journalists, men and women considered anti-American simply because they dared to speak of true independence. This was not security, brothers and sisters. This was an attempt to control the very political soul of a nation. The compound had become a kingdom beyond the reach of Burkina Faso's laws, a parallel authority fueled by budgets worth billions of US dollars. Not a single dollar of that huge budget trickled down to build a clinic or pave a road for the people being watched. This discovery was not just a breach of sovereignty. It was a perfect, sickening mirror of neo-colonial control, only updated with the sharp edges of 21st century technology. It made every handshake, every aid package, every smile from a foreign diplomat suddenly look like a carefully constructed piece of a grand manipulation. The question that now hangs over Africa, a question for all of us in the diaspora to hear, is sharp and clear. If a base on Burkinabe soil could be transformed into a fortress of foreign surveillance, how many other African nations are unknowingly hosting the same silent networks? How many other leaders are being tracked while they sleep, their minerals mapped while they pray? It was time for the truth to stand up and roar. The moment of decision arrived with the force of a storm. Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people, not in a closed diplomatic chamber, but in the open square of national truth. He held the evidence, the documents, the photographs, and he made his announcement that fell like a clap of thunder. He said, "This is not a security base. This is a control center. It does not protect Burkina Faso. It monitors and manipulates it." And with the evidence laid bare, the young captain moved from silence to a righteous action that shook the diplomatic world to its core. What was that audacious ultimatum? And how did the mighty Washington, D.C. respond when they were told, "No, you need to hear this"? The moment arrived, not behind closed doors, not in the hush of diplomatic whisperings, but in the public square, beneath the uncompromising gaze of a nation finally awake. Captain Ibrahim, the man who would not trade principle for profit, did not equivocate. He held the damning evidence. He spoke the hard truth. And then he delivered the sentence. He issued a solemn, unyielding ultimatum. The CIA, he declared, had 48 hours, 2 days and 2 nights, to leave Burkina soil. Hark, my congregation. In a single sentence, this young leader transformed what was once a quiet negotiation into a public confrontation of the highest magnitude. If they stayed, they did so against the sovereign will of the Burkina people, and if they left, they admitted the truth of what he had exposed. This was not merely defiance. This was a redefinition of sovereignty in the modern age. Naturally, the response from Washington was swift, sharp, and entirely predictable. Officials warned quickly of devastating consequences. They threatened aid cuts. They spoke of sanctions. They promised isolation. Their message was simple yet chilling. Without us, you will collapse. You need our dollars to survive. In 1 year alone, the U.S. had allocated well over $150 million in security and development assistance across the Sahel. That financial pipeline became the first brutal weapon wielded against Ouagadougou. They believed, in their arrogance, that a small nation's dignity could be easily bought and sold. That principle would fold instantly under the weight of lost contracts. But Captain Ibrahim's reply, praise God, was a blade cutting through the fog of dependency. He stood firm against the tidal wave of threats. He declared a truth that every colonized soul understands deep in their bones. Aid that comes with chains is not aid, it is ransom. Say that with me, friends. Aid that comes with chains is not aid, it is ransom. This was the core struggle, wasn't it? For too long, Africa's national budgets have been tied to conditions, loans that return tenfold to the creditors, aid packages that dictated domestic policy, and security arrangements that masked espionage. Burkina Faso's economy may be small, barely $20 billion in GDP. But the captain argued that African sovereignty now, independence measured in principle and self-respect, is worth more than dependency wrapped in billions. Can a nation truly claim freedom, truly preach liberty, if its very survival depends on the permission of outsiders? No. A resounding no. The world watched, holding its breath. Analysts in Washington warned of a dangerous precedent. If Burkina Faso could expel the CIA, what would stop Niger, Mali, or even larger African states from following suit? European media framed the move as reckless, focusing only on the potential financial abyss awaiting the nation. They missed the spirit of the moment. They missed the power of a people choosing hardship with dignity over comfort with chains. The ultimatum stood, a shield for Burkina Faso's dignity, and a sword pointed directly at the decaying structure of neo-colonial control. It was a choice between survival on someone else's terms and self-determination on God's good earth. The deadline passed, beloved. The CIA was forced to pack up their silent, secretive kingdom. But when a superpower is told no so boldly, the punishment does not end with the withdrawal. The economic storm was only just beginning. Could the people of Burkina Faso endure the hardships that followed their magnificent act of independence? Or would the pressure prove too heavy? I want to know what you think. Did Traoré's stand on African sovereignty now justify the risk of severe economic sanctions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. My sisters and brothers, the world expected collapse. They predicted isolation. But when the punishment was delivered, when Washington suspended aid programs and withdrew the remaining advisors, reality took a magnificent, glorious turn. What was intended as a blow to divide and destabilize became instead a badge of honor. Instead of finding herself alone in the storm, Burkina Faso found herself embraced by the warmth of regional solidarity. Ghana and Nigeria stepped forward quickly with pledges of bilateral support. The African Development Bank, that mighty engine of the continent's future, announced emergency financing packages worth hundreds of millions of US dollars, specifically aimed at stabilizing the Sahel economies. Hark! What was meant to be the undoing became the uniting. The message to the ordinary Burkinabe citizen was powerful, clear, and undeniable. Sovereignty comes at a price, yes, but it also earns a respect that no borrowed dollar can buy. A small nation could stand its ground against the strongest power on earth and not be abandoned. But the ripple did not stop at the border. What began in Ouagadougou did not stay in Ouagadougou. It was a divine spark that ignited a chain reaction across the great motherland. In Niamey, Niger's parliament, watching this courageous display, opened hearings on the presence of Western military bases, questioning contracts that had been signed in secrecy and fear. In N'Djamena, Chad's leaders announced a review of all foreign agreements tied to intelligence. And the whispers that began in the Sahel traveled down the continent, reaching Dakar, Kampala, and even Lusaka. If Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation, could reclaim control, why not us? The movement soon reached the great halls of the African Union in Addis Ababa. That body, often criticized for its cautious stance, was forced to act. They introduced a draft framework that would, for the first time in history, set legal limits on foreign intelligence operations across member states. This move shook the very foundation of Western influence, where billions of dollars of defense operations are valued annually. This is the power of a single courageous act, friends. Captain Traoré's gamble was clear: principle today, sustainability tomorrow. He forced the continent to see that its true strength does not lie in securing handouts, but in demanding its inherent, God-given dignity. The symbolic power is undeniable. One small Sahel nation, forcing a superpower to retreat, has emboldened an entire continent to demand transparency. But now, beloved, the great question rises. If the dominoes continue to fall, and if Africa moves from fragmented acts of defiance to a united strategy of sovereignty, what then? When the final accounts are settled, what did that powerful silent withdrawal of the CIA leave behind? What treasures were abandoned in the rush to leave? The answer is more explosive than their very presence. History does not always turn with explosions, beloved. Sometimes it shifts in silence. The withdrawal of the CIA, following the Ibrahim Traoré CIA expulsion ultimatum, was one such moment. No shots fired, no last-minute standoffs, just a quiet, humiliating departure that spoke louder than any battle could ever have roared. On the first day, the convoys of black SUVs rolled out under heavy secrecy. Helicopters lifted equipment into the vast Sahel sky. Computers, satellite dishes, crates marked with codes that only the intelligence world understood. These were not trophies of cooperation, but the bitter, silent symbols of an era ending. The mighty had been told to leave, and they left. The gates that once seemed untouchable now stood deserted, their silence a powerful testimony to the will of a sovereign people. But here is where the story moves from defiance to divine inspiration. When the compound finally stood empty, the silence revealed something even more explosive than its presence, a trove of data left behind, a library of surveillance that shook not just Ouagadougou, but the entire African continent. Inside the deserted halls, investigators uncovered racks of servers humming with stored information. Hard drives contained high-resolution geological maps of Burkina Faso's gold mines, uranium fields, and manganese deposits, resources worth billions of US dollars on global markets. What was presented as security was, in truth, a quiet preparation for control. And there were the dossiers, files on teachers, activists, and parliamentarians, those who dared to dissent. This was not security. This was a deliberate attempt to manage the political future of a nation by controlling its most courageous citizens. Faced with this damning evidence, Ibrahim Traoré, the man of principle, made a choice few leaders would dare. He ordered the documents declassified and released to the public. Screens in Ouagadougou's National Assembly lit up with images of confiscated servers and technical evidence. What had been whispered in rumor was now undeniable fact. But the captain had a final, inspired vision. The abandoned compound, that scar of foreign control, would not remain an empty relic. With a bold decree, he ordered the site rebuilt, not as a fortress of secrecy, but as a center for African youth leadership training. The same walls that once monitored a continent would now host classrooms, debates, and workshops designed to equip a new generation with the tools of true independence. What once symbolized submission will now stand as a monument to defiance. The base that once silenced voices will now amplify them. But the profound question remains, my friends. If this single act of courage, the Ibrahim Traoré CIA expulsion, can convert a symbol of foreign control into a school of African pride, what would happen if every nation across the continent found the courage to do the same, turning all their shadows into beacons for the generations to come? The story of the Ibrahim Traoré CIA expulsion will be remembered not merely as a political decision, but as a turning point in history itself. A base once thought untouchable was dismantled without a single shot fired, proving to the world that true power is not defined by military hardware or billion-dollar budgets, but by the determined will of a people to defend their dignity. The world witnessed the collapse of the myth of invincibility, the arrogant belief that Africa could forever be managed and controlled. This young man, Captain Traoré, reminded his people, and by extension the entire global diaspora, that the measure of sovereignty lies not in borrowed protection, but in the willingness to look a superpower in the eye and say, "We will take the hard road of self-respect." This is the future we are fighting for. This is what African sovereignty now looks like. Not a demand for charity, but a demand for control of one's own destiny. The message is clear, my brothers and sisters. The future of Africa will be built on choices rooted in courage, unity, and truth. This is a moment for every African nation, every leader, every citizen, to embrace the principle that their dignity is a currency worth more than any foreign grant. We must internalize this victory. We must carry the vision forward. The time for waiting for permission is over. The time for African sovereignty now is here. And so, the open question remains for you, our beloved audience. If one small nation can stand tall and refuse the chains of control, what would happen if an entire continent spoke with one voice? Would Africa finally move from the margins of history to the center of its own destiny? We invite you to carry this fire forward. Do not let this testimony end here. If you believe in the power of this message, if you believe that dignity is a non-negotiable right, then share this video with 5 people who need to hear this message today. Leave your reflections and prayers in the comments below, because we are a community committed to knowledge, justice, and the story of Africa rising. Prayerfully consider hitting the subscribe button. Join the movement and commit to standing vigilant with us for the ultimate reclamation of the motherland's soul.